If you've ever trusted someone with your whole heart, only to discover they were waiting for the perfect moment to betray you, then this story is for you. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and if stories about family, justice, and second chances mean something to you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Now let me tell you about the day my own son broke my heart. I thought losing my husband would be the hardest day of my life. I was wrong. Because 6 weeks later, my own son looked me straight in the eyes and told me I no longer belonged in the home his father and I spent 43 years building together. You want to know how a mother gets to that moment? How a boy you rocked to sleep, a boy you'd have thrown yourself in front of a truck for, turns into a stranger standing in your kitchen with his arms crossed? I didn't know either. Not until it happened to me. My name's Eleanor. I'm 71 years old, and until March of last year, I was a wife. Frank and I got married in 1976, back when gas was cheap and nobody locked their doors at night. We didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, but we had a plan. We bought 4 acres out past the county line, and Frank built our house with his own 2 hands, 1 room at a time, over the better part of a decade. I used to stand at that kitchen window while he worked, holding our baby boy, Danny, on my hip, and I'd think, we did it. We actually did it. Frank wasn't a man of many words, but he showed his love in the work of his hands. I remember the winter he built the fireplace, working out in that cold with his coat sleeves rolled up, stacking brick after brick until his fingers were raw, just so we'd have somewhere warm to put Danny's first Christmas stocking. I remember him staying up 3 nights straight the summer a storm took half our roof, hammering shingles back on by lantern light because he refused to let his family sleep under a leaking roof, even for one more night. We didn't have much money in those early years. I sewed my own curtains out of remnant fabric from the mill in town. Frank traded fence work with our neighbor Earl for a second-hand tractor that ran maybe half the time. But we had each other, and we had that little house slowly becoming something bigger than either one of us alone. By the time Danny was in grade school, we'd added the second bedroom, then the mudroom off the back, then finally that big wraparound porch Frank always dreamed about. Every single addition, every board, every nail, was a promise we made to each other and to our son, that no matter what life threw at us, we'd build something solid enough to withstand it. But what happened next still gives me chills. That house wasn't just wood and nails to us. It was every Thanksgiving we ever hosted. It was Danny's height marked in pencil on the pantry doorframe, from the year he was 2 all the way up to the year he left for college. It was the porch swing Frank built the summer I was pregnant, because I couldn't get comfortable anywhere else. Frank passed in February. Heart attack, sudden, no warning at all. 1 minute he was fixing the gutter, complaining about his knees, and the next minute he was gone. 43 years of marriage, and I didn't even get to say goodbye properly. Folks kept telling me time heals. I'll be honest with you, I still don't believe that. Time just teaches you how to carry the weight different. Danny came to every single day of those first 2 weeks. Brought me casseroles his wife Karen made, mowed the lawn, sat with me on that porch swing and cried right along with me. I thought, thank God. Thank God I raised a good boy. Thank God I'm not alone in this. I thought that was the worst part. I couldn't have been more wrong. It was around week 3 when Danny started saying things that seemed harmless at first. Just little comments. Mom, this house is an awful lot for one person to keep up. Mom, have you thought about what happens if you fall in here and nobody knows for hours? I brushed it off. I figured he was worried about me, and honestly, that's a sweet thing for a son to worry about. I told him, Danny, your father built every board in this house. I'm not going anywhere. He'd nod and drop it. For a while. But then Karen started coming around more, always with that same tight little smile. Always finding a reason to open the hallway closet or measure a doorway with her eyes. I told myself I was being paranoid. A grieving woman sees shadows everywhere. Doesn't she? One night at dinner, Danny brought a folder. Real estate comps, he called it. Printouts. Showing what houses on my road had sold for. Just so you know what it's worth, Mom, he said. In case you ever want options. I remember setting my fork down real slow and asking him, options for what, exactly? What I found the next morning changed everything. He backpedaled fast that night, said he only meant it as information, nothing more. I let it go, because that's what you do when you love somebody and you want to believe the best of them. But something in my gut had shifted. It was small, like a hairline crack in a windshield. You don't notice it much until one day the whole thing shatters. A few weeks later, Danny showed up with a contractor named Russ. Said Russ could look over the property, check the roofline, check the old well pump, make sure everything was safe for me living alone. I thought that was thoughtful. I made coffee, put out a plate of Frank's favorite oatmeal cookies, and let Russ walk the property with a clipboard for 2 hours. I didn't think much of it until I noticed Russ taking pictures of the property line. Not the house. The line. Where my land ended and the county road began. I asked him about it, real polite. He just smiled and said, just doing my job, ma'am. That night I mentioned it to Danny on the phone, and he got real quiet, then changed the subject to asking if I'd eaten dinner yet. Grief does something strange to a person's instincts. It dulls them right when you need them the sharpest. I wanted so badly to believe my son loved me the same simple way he did when he was 7 years old, bringing me dandelions from the yard like they were roses. I didn't want to see what was forming right in front of me. I wasn't ready for what my son did next. Spring turned into summer, and the requests kept coming, each one a little bigger than the last. First it was, Mom, let me add my name to the deed, just so things are simpler if something happens to you. I said no, gentle as I could, and told him Frank. And I had a will, everything was already settled proper through Mr. Whitcomb, our family attorney of almost 30 years. Then it was, Mom, let me handle your finances, you don't need the stress. Then it was, Mom, we really should talk about selling, at your age upkeep isn't practical. Every single time I said no, the conversation got a little colder. A little more clipped. Karen stopped bringing casseroles altogether. Danny stopped calling just to check in. And only called when he wanted something signed, some form filled out, some conversation started about the future of the property. I remember sitting on that porch swing alone one evening in June, looking out over the same fields Frank and I planted our first garden in, and thinking, something is wrong here. Something is very wrong. But I didn't have proof of anything. Just a feeling. And feelings don't hold up when your own child looks you dead in the eye and says, Mom, you're imagining things. I wish I could tell you that was the end. It wasn't. By July, I woke up one Saturday morning to the sound of a truck idling in my driveway. And men I'd never seen before unloading metal fence posts off the back of it. I threw my robe on and went out there in my slippers, heart pounding, and asked what in the world was going on. One of the workers looked confused and said, Ma'am, we were told this whole back section was approved for fencing. Danny signed off on the permit. I called Danny right then and there, standing in my own driveway in my robe, and he answered like it was the most normal thing in the world. Mom, calm down. It's just a fence along the east side. It keeps things tidy. Tidy for who, Danny? This is my land. There was a pause on the line. A pause I will never forget, because it told me everything. Before he even said a word. Actually, Mom, we probably need to talk about that. Then he said something I'll never forget. He came over that afternoon, and Karen came with him, sitting on my couch with her. Hands folded like she was at a business meeting instead of her mother-in-law's living room. Danny stood by the fireplace, the same fireplace his father built brick by brick. The winter before Danny was born, and he said the words I never in 100 years thought I'd hear out of my own child's mouth. Mom, I've been talking to a lawyer. Dad's estate is more complicated than you think. There's a legal argument that part of this property should have transferred differently. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to protect what's mine. I sat there stunned. Genuinely, physically stunned, like somebody had knocked the wind clean out of me. What's yours? I repeated. Danny, this is my home. Your father and I built this together. Before you were even born. He looked at me, and for the first time in 39 years, I did not recognize my son's eyes. If you want to stay here, he said, you're going to start paying me rent. What happened next left me speechless, and it only got worse from there. I laughed. I actually laughed, because it sounded so absurd I thought he had to be joking. But Danny didn't laugh back. Karen didn't laugh back. They just sat there, watching me, waiting for me to understand they were dead serious. You're joking, I said. Tell me you're joking, Danny. I'm not joking, Mom. I had a survey done. There's a boundary discrepancy. My lawyer says the eastern half of this property, including part of the driveway, may legally belong to me through Dad's original land agreement with his brother back in the 70s. I hadn't even known Frank's brother had ever been part of any agreement. 43 years living on that land, and my own son was telling me about some mysterious paperwork I'd never once heard mentioned. Show me, I said. Show me this paperwork. He hesitated. It's still being finalized. That's when I knew, deep down in my bones, that something crooked was happening. And my son was either the architect of it or the fool being used by somebody smarter and greedier than him. Give me a break, I remember thinking. 43 years, and it comes to this. Karen finally spoke up from the couch, her voice smooth as glass. Eleanor, nobody's trying to hurt you. We just think, realistically, a woman your age shouldn't be managing 4 acres alone. Danny's just trying to be smart about the family's future. The family's future. As if I wasn't part of that family anymore. As if I'd already been quietly moved into the past tense in their minds. I stood up from my chair slower than I meant to, my knees aching the way they do these days, and I looked at both of them standing there in my living room like a couple of lawyers instead of my own flesh and blood. This is my present, I told them. Not just my future. My present. I am standing in it right now. Neither one of them had an answer for that. Danny just stared at the floor, and Karen picked an invisible piece of lint off her sleeve, and I understood then that whatever conversation happened next wasn't going to be a conversation at all. It was going to be a fight. I couldn't believe what I found buried in that folder. That night, after they left, I couldn't sleep. I sat at Frank's old desk, going through the file cabinet where we kept every important document of our married life, and I found our original deed, the one from 1979, with Frank's father's signature as witness, plain as day, no brother mentioned anywhere on it. I photocopied everything I could find and drove it straight to Mr. Whitcomb's office first thing Monday morning. He's getting up there in years himself, must be near 80 now. But his mind is still sharp as a tack. He read through everything with his glasses low on. His nose, and when he looked up at me, his face had gone pale. "Eleanor," he said, "has Danny mentioned a survey company called Bramwell Land Services?" I told him yes, that was the name on Russ's paperwork. Mr. Whitcomb sighed real deep. That companies had complaints filed against them before. Falsified boundary lines for a client trying to push out an elderly widow 2 counties over. Case got dropped on a technicality, but everybody in this business knows their name. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. I wish that had been the worst of it. It wasn't even close. Word got around fast in a small town, the way it always does. My neighbor, Doreen, who's lived across the road from us for 20-some years, came by with a pie one afternoon, sat right down at my kitchen table, and told me she'd seen unfamiliar cars parked along the property line taking measurements for weeks before that fence crew ever showed up. I didn't want to say nothing, Eleanor, she said. Wasn't my business. But now that it's out in the open, I figured you ought to know. Then my friend Marlene from church, bless her heart, told me her nephew works for the county clerk's office, and she'd ask him quiet like whether any new surveys had been filed on our parcel. Within a week, half my church prayer group knew what was happening, and instead of gossip, what I got was an army. Casseroles again, but this time with notes tucked underneath the foil that said things like, "We're praying for you, and we're not going anywhere." Not everybody sided with me right away, though. I want to be honest about that too. Danny had his own friends in town, folks he'd grown up with, and a few of them figured I must have been exaggerating, or maybe getting confused in my grief. I ran into one of them, a fella named Pete who used to fish with Danny back in high school, at the feed store one Saturday morning. "Heard you're causing your boy a lot of trouble, Mrs. Eleanor," he said, not unkindly, just careless the way young men sometimes are. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Pete, I raised that boy to know right from wrong. I'm not causing him trouble. I'm just refusing to hand him my whole life because he asked nice the first few times and mean the rest." He didn't have much to say after that. Word must have gotten back to Danny, because that evening he called me, furious, accusing me of turning the whole town against him. "I didn't turn anybody against you, Danny," I told him. "You did that yourself, the day you decided a fence and a fake survey were easier than an honest conversation with your own mother." Danny, meanwhile, kept sending texts about resolving this like adults and not wanting it to get ugly. As if I was the one making it ugly. As if a mother defending 43 years of memory was somehow the unreasonable one. But then a letter arrived that made my hands shake. It came certified mail, a stiff white envelope with a law firm's letterhead I didn't recognize. Inside was a formal notice claiming a legal dispute over property boundaries, and demanding I either agree to mediation or face a court filing within 30 days. My hands were shaking so bad I had to set the letter down on the counter and just breathe for a minute. I called Mr. Whitcomb, and he told me to bring it straight over. When I got there, he was already on the phone with someone, and when he hung up, his expression had changed from concern to something sharper. Almost like relief, strange as that sounds. "Eleanor," he said, "sit down. There's something I need to tell you. Something Frank asked me to keep quiet unless the day ever came that it was needed." My heart about stopped. "Frank came to me 8 years ago," he continued, worried about exactly this kind of situation happening one day. Not because he distrusted Danny outright, but because he'd seen it happen to other families. He wanted to make sure that no matter what happened to him, this house could never be taken from you. What he told me next changed absolutely everything. Mr. Whitcomb pulled a thick folder from his file cabinet, one I'd never laid eyes on before. Inside was a legal document Frank had quietly filed years earlier, placing the entire property into a protected trust in my name alone, with an ironclad clause preventing any transfer, claim, lien, or boundary dispute from taking effect without my sole written consent, verified through the original 1979 deed, the very deed I already had proof of. Frank had even gone so far as to have the property resurveyed back then by a certified, reputable surveyor, and that survey was on file with the county, matching our original deed to the exact inch, decades before Bramwell Land Services ever showed up with their so-called new measurements. I sat there with tears streaming down my face, because in that moment, I understood something so simple and so profound. My husband, even after he was gone, was still protecting me. Still building something for me to stand on, same as he built that house with his bare hands all those years ago. He never told you, Mr. Whitcomb said gently, because he didn't want to accuse Danny of anything before it happened. He hoped it never would. I never imagined justice would come from beyond the grave. But it did. Armed with that trust document and the original certified survey, Mr. Whitcomb filed a response to the law firm's notice within the week, laying out in plain legal language that any claim against the property was not just weak, but actively fraudulent, given the falsified survey data from Bramwell Land Services. He didn't stop there either. He filed a formal complaint with the county, and reached out to a contact he still had at the sheriff's department, a young deputy who'd grown up 2 farms down from ours and used to ride his bike past our place every summer. As a boy, Sheriff Collins himself came out to see me personally. Big man, kind eyes, the type who still tips his hat when he walks into a room. He sat at my kitchen table and told me flat out, Mrs. Eleanor, falsifying a land survey to defraud a property owner isn't just a civil matter. Depending on what we find, it could be criminal. I remember asking him, my voice barely above a whisper, does that include my son? He looked at me with something like sympathy in his eyes. Ma'am, that depends on how much he knew, and how much he chose not to ask. A deputy came out to the house 2 days later, a young woman named Deputy Ruiz. Polite as could be, and she asked if she could sit with me a while and go over the timeline of everything that had happened since Frank passed. I walked her through it. Month by month, the folder of real estate comps, Russ and his clipboard, the fence crew, the demand for rent. She wrote it all down careful, and then she asked me something that stuck with me for a long while after. Mrs. Eleanor, in your opinion, do you think your son understood what he was doing was wrong? I sat with that question a good long minute before I answered. I think, I finally said, my son wanted something to be true badly enough that he stopped asking whether it actually was. Deputy Ruiz nodded slow, like she'd heard some version of that answer plenty of times before in this line of work. She thanked me for my honesty and told me the investigation would take some time, but that the evidence against Bramwell Land Services alone was strong enough to move forward regardless of what happened with Danny personally. That gave me a strange kind of relief. Whatever happened to my son, the fraud itself, the fake survey, the falsified boundary lines, that part was going to be exposed no matter what. Truth has a way of surfacing eventually, even when powerful people try awful hard to keep it buried. What the investigation uncovered left the whole town talking. Turns out, Danny had known plenty. Text messages between him and Russ, the contractor, subpoenaed as part of the investigation, showed Danny asking directly whether the survey could be adjusted to show the boundary further onto my side of the property. Russ's response was even worse. He'd written back that Bramwell could make it work for an additional fee, same as they'd done before for another client. When that came out, half the county heard about it within days. Doreen told me people were talking about it at the diner in town. Marlene said her nephew at the clerk's office Said it was the biggest scandal that office had seen in years. Danny called me in a panic once he realized the investigation was moving forward. His voice cracked on the phone, all that cold confidence from before completely gone. "Mom, please, you have to believe me, I never meant for it to go this far." I sat there holding that phone, feeling 43 years of memories rushing through my mind, and I finally said the only thing I had left in me. "Danny, your father spent his whole life building something for this family, out of love. Not greed. You tried to take it out of greed, not love. There's a difference, and I think somewhere deep down, you know that. I never thought I'd see my own son in a courtroom. But there we were. The case moved faster than anyone expected, mostly because the evidence was so overwhelming there wasn't much room left to argue. Bramwell Land Services lost their certification entirely and are currently facing multiple fraud charges across 2 counties, mine included. Russ the contractor took a plea deal and testified against them in exchange for a reduced sentence. Danny wasn't charged criminally, thank God, mostly because Mr. Whitcomb argued. And I agreed, that Danny's part was born more out of desperation and bad influence than a fully formed criminal intent. But the civil case was brutal for him. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Holloway, looked over every document, every falsified line, every text message, and dismissed his claim on the property entirely, ordering him to cover all my legal fees on top of it. I sat in that courtroom in my good blue dress, the one I wore to Frank's funeral, watching my son stand there as the judge read her ruling. Karen wasn't beside him that day. I later found out she'd already moved out 2 weeks prior, once she realized there wasn't going to be a house or a payday waiting on the other side of all this. Judge Holloway didn't raise her voice once, but every word she said landed like a hammer. "Mr. Danny Whitmore," she said, "this court has reviewed a certified survey filed in 1979, a protected trust document filed years before your father's passing, and communications showing clear intent to alter land records through fraudulent means. This is not a boundary dispute. This is an attempt to deprive a widow of her home through deception." Danny's attorney tried to argue that his client had been misled by the contractor, that Danny himself hadn't known the full extent of the fraud. Judge Holloway wasn't having it. "A man does not need to draft the fraud himself to benefit from it willingly," she said. "Ignorance by choice is not the same as ignorance by circumstance." I remember the whole courtroom going quiet after that. Even the court reporter seemed to pause a half second before typing it into the record. Doreen, sitting 2 rows behind me, reached forward and squeezed my shoulder. Danny looked over at me once, just once, right before they called the next case. I still don't know exactly what was in his eyes. Shame, maybe. Or maybe, finally, the truth catching up to him all at once. I thought that courtroom moment would be the end of my story. It wasn't. Not even close. For almost a year after that, Danny and I barely spoke. A birthday card here, a stiff phone call there, mostly logistics, mostly silence where 40 years of closeness used to be. I won't lie to you, that silence hurt worse in some ways than the betrayal itself. Because losing Frank was loss I understood. Losing the relationship with my own son, while he was still breathing, still living 20 minutes away, that was a whole different kind of grief. I kept the house. Of course I kept the house. I fixed that pencil-marked doorframe with a little frame around it instead of painting over it, because some things deserve to stay exactly as they are. I sat on that porch swing most evenings, sometimes with Doreen, sometimes with Marlene and the girls from church, and slowly, I started to feel like myself again. Then one October evening, almost a year to the day after that fence crew first showed up in my driveway, I heard a truck pull in. I looked out expecting Doreen, but it was Danny, standing there in the same driveway, looking smaller somehow than I remembered him. He didn't come in demanding anything that time. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, and said, "Mom, can we talk?" Really talk this time? I wasn't sure I was ready to hear what he had to say. But I let him in anyway. We sat at that same kitchen table, the one Frank built with his own hands out of old barnwood back in 1985, and for the first time in over a year, Danny cried in front of me. Not the manipulative tears from before, not the panic tears from the phone call during the investigation. Real tears. Ashamed tears. "I lost myself somewhere in there, Mom," he said. I told myself I deserved it, that I was just being practical, protecting my future. But the truth is, I got greedy, and I let Karen's fear about money and Russ's smooth talking convince me that taking something from you was the same as earning something for myself. It's not the same. I know that now. I didn't forgive him right then and there, and I want to be honest with you about that. Because forgiveness isn't a light switch, it's a process, same as grief is. I told him, "Danny, I love you. I have loved you since before you could even open your eyes. But love and trust aren't the same thing, and you broke one of them badly enough that the other one has to be rebuilt slow, brick by brick, same as your father built this house." He nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a flicker of the boy I raised, looking back at me instead of the stranger who tried to take my home. The years that followed taught me more about healing than I ever expected to learn at 71 years old. It's been a while since that conversation now. Danny comes by most Sundays, same as he used to before all this happened, except now there's an honesty between us that maybe wasn't fully there even before Frank passed. He helps me in the garden. He fixed that porch swing last spring when one of the chains started rusting through. He's rebuilding trust the slow way, the right way, the only way that actually holds up over time. I won't pretend everything's perfectly healed. There are still moments the old hurt creeps back in, usually late at night when the house is quiet and my mind wanders back to that day he stood by his father's fireplace and demanded rent from his own mother. But I choose, every single day, to hold on to the boy who used to bring me dandelions instead of the man who once tried to fence me off my own land. Last Thanksgiving was the first one Danny hosted part of at my house since everything happened. He showed up early that morning, before anybody else, and asked if he could help me in the kitchen the way he used to when he was a boy standing on a stool beside his father. We didn't talk about the lawsuit or the fence or any of it. We just peeled potatoes together at that same counter, quiet at first, and then slowly talking about nothing in particular, the way family does when the wound has finally started closing over. Right before everyone sat down to eat, Danny stood up at the head of the table. Frank's old seat, the one nobody had sat in for 2 years, and he looked at me before he sat down in it, like he was asking permission. I nodded, and he sat, and for a moment I saw his father in him so clearly it took my breath away. Not the man who tried to take my house. The good man underneath it, the one Frank raised him to be, before fear and greed got their claws into him. To Dad, Danny said, raising his glass, and to Mom, for never letting me get away with becoming somebody he wouldn't have been proud of. I cried into my mashed potatoes that day, and nobody at that table thought less of me for it. Karen and Danny divorced not long after the court case wrapped up. I don't say that with satisfaction, because heartbreak doesn't feel good no matter who it lands on, but I will say this. A person's true character has a way of showing itself the moment there's nothing left to gain. What I learned through all of this is something I hope every single one of you takes to heart. Grief makes you vulnerable in ways you don't expect, and there will always be someone. Sometimes someone you love most in this world, who's willing to take advantage of that. Vulnerability if greed gets its hooks into them deep enough. Protect your paperwork. Protect your voice. Never let anyone, family included, convince you that standing up for what's rightfully yours makes you the villain of the story. But I also learned something else, something maybe even more important. People can change if the accountability is real and the love underneath it all was real too. My son did an unforgivable thing, and yet, slowly, painfully, honestly, he found his way back to being a good man. Not because I let him off easy, but because I loved him enough to hold the line, and he loved me enough to finally understand why that line mattered. Frank used to say that a house isn't really a home until it's been through something hard together. I used to think he meant storms, or hard winters, or tight money years. I understand now he meant something deeper than that. That house still stands on those same 4 acres, same porch swing, same pencil marks on that pantry doorframe, same kitchen table Frank built with his own 2 hands. And every single day I wake up in it, I'm reminded that love, real love, the kind that gets built one board at a time over 43 years, is stronger than any greed that tries to tear it down. If you've ever had someone you love make you feel small in your own home, in your own life, I want you to hear this from an old woman who's lived it. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to say no. And you are allowed to still love someone from a distance while you rebuild what they broke, one honest day at a time. I know some of you watching this have your own version of Danny in your life. Maybe it's a son, maybe it's a daughter, maybe it's someone else entirely who you never expected to turn on you the way they did. I want you to know your feelings are not foolishness. And your instincts, even when the people around you insist you're overreacting, deserve to be trusted. Get your paperwork in order. Talk to someone you trust. And never, ever let guilt convince you that protecting yourself makes you a bad mother, a bad father, or a bad person. It doesn't. It makes you wise. Frank built me a house that could withstand anything, even the people I never thought I'd need protection from. And in the end, that's the greatest gift he ever gave me.